Hello and welcome to the 741 channel. Thank you for stopping by. Today we're going to take a look at my old 1981 Honda CM400C. This is going to be the first video in sort of a series of videos I'm going to make. I've got some repairs to do, but we're going to do those in subsequent videos. This video is just going to focus on kind of an overview of the bike, and I'll tell you a little bit about the story of this motorcycle. It's got a little bit of an interesting past. I'm going to go freehand with the camera now as we take an overview of the bike. I apologize if this gets a little bit shaky. I'll do my best to keep it as stable as I can. So as you can see, this thing is more or less a survivor. It's pretty much 100% original, and it only has about 11,000 miles on it. Probably end up hitting 11,000 this summer. You can see I've even got an original Honda logo keychain here that came with the bike when I bought it. I believe I'm the third owner, but we'll talk a little bit more about that as we get on with the video. Now for a 1981 that's more or less original, you can see it's in pretty good shape. All the gauges and everything are clear, no cracks, no scratches. The instrument panel looks good. The original break-in sticker is even still on the speedometer, and I've left it there just for fun. Now you may be able to see it's a little bit dusty. It's been sitting in the garage all winter. Today is the first real warm day of spring. I think it's about May 3rd or so here in Connecticut, so time to get it out and take a look at it for the season here. So you can see obviously the tires are not the originals, but these are getting kind of old now. These were the tires that were on the bike when I bought it in 2003, but they're still in pretty good shape, and I really don't ride this thing that much, so I've just been using them, and I keep an eye on them every spring. Once I start to see evidence of cracking and that kind of a thing, I'll probably replace them, but for now they're okay. Now up here in the front, what we're actually going to be working on in this video series is the front caliper is partially seized or stuck or something. The brakes just aren't working quite right anymore, so we're going to pull this apart and see if we can rebuild it. The other problem that I've got is something is wrong with the speedometer. When I'm going along, the speedometer goes up to 80 miles an hour or so and kind of stays there even when I'm doing 20 or 25, and the needle kind of bounces around and jumps, and then sometimes it'll go to 0 and then go right back to 80. Now, at one point I was getting some squeaking up here, and I'm not sure if it was in sort of the mechanism here that activates the speedometer, or if the cable is messed up, or if the speedometer itself is messed up. So we'll take a look at that whole system and see if we can figure out what's going on in a subsequent video. But other than that, you can see everything is in pretty good shape. Fork seals aren't leaking or any of that. The original Comstar wheels are here, and they're all in pretty good shape. You know, a little bit worse for the wear, but not too bad. Now if I move a little further back, we'll take a look at the engine. This of course is the 400cc parallel twin that Honda made back in the day. And you can see that this one is in pretty good cosmetic shape, a little bit of pitting and that kind of a thing from over the years. And I've really only had to do routine maintenance to this. I've done the cam chain tensioner and adjusted the valves, and I've even made videos of that in the past, and I'll link those below and up in the corner somewhere if you want to take a look at those. Overall, the engine's okay. It needs to be cleaned. This thing's been sitting all winter, like I said, so we'll have to get the power washer out and kind of get things degreased and cleaned up. But you can see there is a little bit of pitting and stuff on the case, but that's to be expected of a engine this vintage. And now I did have one problem with this that I didn't document in a video. In fact, this goes back to at least 10 years ago or so now. I had accidentally left the petcock on during the winter, and I came into my garage and found gas smell, and there was gas all leaking out of the machine. And what had happened was, through some kind of pressure differential or something, the gas leaked into the carburetor and overflowed the carburetor. The floats stuck open or something, and there was gas all leaked all over the engine. And what happened was it seeped into the seal between the cover and the crankcase and got all mixed in with the oil. So what I ended up doing at that point was I drained all the oil out. I took both side covers off, cleaned everything out as best I could, changed the gaskets. I ran some oil through it, ran the bike for maybe, I don't know, 50 miles or so, came back, changed the oil, and then did it again for about 100 miles or so, just to make sure all that gas was out of the crankcase, and then put fresh oil in it, and keep an eye on it ever since. But it's been okay. There's been no issues since then. Now when I did that, I did repaint the side covers, so to speak. I cleaned them up, polished them, redid the black in here, and then clear coated everything. You can see there's some chipping that's been kind of going on since then. Like I said, it was over 10 years ago that this happened now. So we're starting to see some pitting of the clear coat and whatnot, and I guess that's to be expected. I just used you know, Krylon or something like that. I didn't get too fancy with it at the time, but it's held up okay, all things considered. Now you can see the only real evidence of cosmetic damage here on the tank is this one little mark, and this was here when I bought it. I don't know, previous owner must have dropped it or something. I never bothered touching this up. I've just kind of left it as it is, and it's been okay. There's no actual rust or anything on there, so we'll just keep it as it is for now. Maybe at some point I'll redo this, but I kind of like having those battle wounds on there. And then looking at the side covering, this decal has kind of faded a bit over the years, and again, I've just kind of left it. Like they say, the bike is only original once, so I'll probably leave it like this, at least for the foreseeable future. Now this bike did come with the factory crash bars that you could get, and I don't think they were original to the bike. I think the last owner put those on because the last owner worked at a Honda warehouse here in Connecticut and had access to some of that stuff, I guess. In fact, I was told that these bugle tips were not original either, or maybe these are the original tips, but they weren't on the bike when the previous owner bought it and they put these on. I'm not sure. I don't know the real history of these bikes. Maybe somebody who knows them better than I do can kind of comment on that. But from everything I've seen, these are what the factory would have put on there, so I'm not really sure. But like I said, the previous owner worked at the Honda warehouse and had access to some of those types of parts, the crash bars. I even got a factory service manual with this bike that was supposedly sourced from the warehouse as well. So taking a look at the back here, you can see the chrome is all in good shape. There's a little bit of pitting and that kind of a thing, but nothing serious. You know, I polish it every so often just to keep everything nice and bright and in good condition. And really the only pitting is sort of in the cracks and crevices where it's hard to get to, and you know, near the fasteners and that kind of a thing. But again, I try and keep it as original as I can, and I don't go too crazy with taking it apart and cleaning every nut and bolt, at least not at this point. Now to my knowledge, this is the factory seat cover, and it's in excellent condition except for this one little blemish here, and this is something that I did a number of years ago. I had a little metal tab on one of my boots and I hooked my foot on there and it kind of ripped it a tiny bit, but it hasn't gotten any worse since then. But I do keep an eye on that, and if it ever gets any worse, I'll try and patch it a little bit, but for now I think we'll just leave it. And like I said, other than that, the saddle is in great shape. Put a little armor all on it every so often just to keep it supple, and this thing stays in the garage when I'm not riding it or making videos about it. Looking at this side of the wheel, you can see drum brakes, of course, on these, and there's a little pitting on the outer surface of the drum. That's been like that since I got it, and I've, again, just kind of left it. Again, you know, only original once, and I don't want to get too crazy with repainting anything. Not at this point, anyway. And again, got the bugle tips here on the other side, and like I said, if you guys know whether or not these are factory for these bikes, let me know. Maybe these were an option on one of the other models, the 400T or something like that, I don't know. And here's the other side of the engine. Looks like we got a little discoloration here on the carburetor. I didn't notice that before. I don't know if maybe something's leaking over here or not. I'll have to take a look at that once I turn the fuel on and fire it up. And then of course the other side cover, when I replaced the gaskets on that side when I had that fuel leak, I did this side as well and kind of redid it. But again, you can see the clear coat has kind of come off, and we've got some pitting and stuff now from over the years. And up here you can see this side of the cylinder head's a little bit pitted and whatnot. I haven't retouched those over the years. That's all original. But I have taken them off to adjust the valves, of course. And this side of the tank, you can see there's no blemishes over here, so whatever happened was only on that side, and this side is good. And then up here you can see the fork boot is getting a little bit brittle. Might be time to start thinking about doing something with those, but I think they're okay for now. And then coming around back up to the front here, you can see everything is pretty much factory original. Not sure if you guys can tell, but this blinker arm is just a tiny bit bent. Now the reason for that is my wife had a little mishap here. My wife rides, and when she rides this bike, and she's an excellent rider actually, but after our son was born, she took a year or two off. But then after a year or two, she decided she wanted to get back on the bike, and so she was practicing here in the yard, and at the time the driveway wasn't paved. We just had crushed gravel in there, and she went onto the driveway and hit a loose stone and kind of laid the bike down. Luckily she didn't get hurt, and the only damage to the bike was that this got bent a little bit. I did bend it back a little bit more than what it is now, but I don't want to do too much to it, and you really only notice it if you look real close. And again, when she laid it down, it was a real slow fall and that kind of a thing. In fact, she almost more or less caught the bike, and it just kind of barely hit the ground when it did, so no real damage done. Okay, so now I'll let you guys know how I came to own this particular bike. It's kind of an interesting story, at least for me. Maybe you guys will find it interesting too. Anyway, back when I was a teenager, maybe very early 20s, the guy next door was into motorcycles too. Now I had a little dirt bike that I used to putt around on. In fact, it was a little too small for me at that point. I had gotten it when I was like 16 or something. But he was into motorcycles too, but he never really had a dirt bike per se. I think he had a couple of Honda XLs, and then he graduated to a Honda CB750. And that bike was just way too big. And then he ended up with a Honda CM400 one summer. And we rode that thing all over the place. Now, of course, neither one of us had motorcycle licenses. The bike wasn't registered. And we would take it on some of the dirt roads and trails around here. That was sort of illegal too, but at least we were off the road. But sometimes we would take it on the road too. And when I say we, he rode the thing 99% of the time, and I just sat on the back. He was a much better road rider than I, even at that time, probably still is. And to be perfectly honest, it was his bike anyway, and I wasn't gonna, try and ride it. I think he let me ride it once or twice just to try it out on the road and maybe in the driveway a little bit. But it was his bike, so he was the driver and I was the passenger. And we had a lot of fun riding around that summer with that motorcycle, that old CM400. And when the summer was over, he wanted to sell it. And I really wanted to buy it from him. I kind of fell in love with the bike, even though we had kind of beat it up a little bit. But at the time, I was still living at home with my dad, and he wasn't too crazy about motorcycles, even though he had been a motorcyclist back when he was young. He was kind of okay with me having the dirt bike, but he was really dead set against me having a street bike, so I never ended up getting it. I figured I was living under his roof, and I should abide by his rules and not piss him off too much. I was getting free rent, so what was I going to do? Now, at the time that my friend had his CM400, there was another one in the neighborhood that would ride around. It was owned by sort of a more responsible adult type, maybe in his late 40s or 50s, kind of like I am now. I'm in my late 40s. Now, he owned a flooring and furniture business, so he was pretty busy most of the time, and he didn't ride the bike a whole lot, but we'd see him ride it around every once in a while. And he always had a milk crate on the back with bungee cords or something so he could throw things in the back. So, like I said, he didn't ride it a whole lot. But we did notice it, especially that summer, since my friend had one that was identical, same color, everything. That bike, we could tell, was in pristine condition. I was kind of hoping he'd put it out for sale, so maybe I could buy that one and maybe talk my dad into it at some point, but that never happened, and life moved on, and my friend sold his 400, and the one that was down there at the furniture store, I forgot about that as well. And like I said, life moved on. Now we'll fast forward to 2002, 2003. Now at that time, I was a little more financially secure. I was out living on my own. I owned my own house. So I was working full time. And I ended up buying myself a Honda XR200 dirt bike so that I could go riding with my buddies. We would go camping and riding up in the Berkshires of Western Mass. And we had a lot of fun. But then I started thinking about it and decided that I really wanted to get my motorcycle license and do some road riding. So what I ended up doing is I went out and I bought a brand new 2003 Kawasaki KLR 250 Dual Sport. And I went and got my motorcycle license, got the bike registered, and I could ride wherever I wanted at that point, on the road or off the road. And I had a blast with that bike. It was great. But that was around the time that I met my wife as well, and she was kind of interested in motorcycling. Now, I taught her how to ride on the Honda XR200, but she wasn't real comfortable riding off-road. She liked kind of a smoother ride. So what we ended up doing is we decided that we would get her motorcycle license as well, and so that she could ride on the street. So what I ended up doing at that point is I sold the XR200 dirt bike and started looking for another street bike, a used street bike that either her or I could ride. Typically it would probably be her, since I would be on the Kawasaki 250. But anyway, I started searching around Craigslist and at that time the classified ads and that kind of a thing. And I came across an ad for this bike, the 1981 CM400, a couple towns over here in Connecticut. And the price was right. It was only $500, and it was low mileage and well kept, and all the typical stuff that you'd see in a typical ad. So I had to go look at it, especially since the history that I had with the CM400. I thought, gee, finally now I can have a 400 like I always wanted. Now the owners had taken immaculate care of this bike. The husband was an auto mechanic by trade, so he kept this thing in top condition, and his wife was the one that worked at the Honda warehouse here in Connecticut, so she was able to get the manual and the parts and all the things you'd need for a vintage Honda like this. But they had owned the bike for a number of years, and she had sort of lost interest in riding, and he wanted to move it out of the garage to make room for another project that he was working on. I think he had a 78 El Camino or something like that. So they put it up for sale, and I ended up buying the bike. Like I said, the price was right and the bike was in perfect condition. So once we went in the house to do the paperwork, and I told the guy where I lived, he saw my address and everything, he said, "Oh, well, you don't live too far from the previous owner of this bike." And he mentioned the name of that person and told me who he bought it from, and it happened to be the furniture store that I mentioned earlier in my story. He was the one that actually bought this bike from the guy that owned the furniture store, the bike that we had seen riding around, and the one that I had kind of originally wanted to buy if I couldn't buy my buddies. Now, of course, once I was telling the previous owner the story of how I always wanted this bike, he even went back out and showed me that the previous owner had put his initials here in the tachometer. So I ended up getting this bike after all, even though it was kind of a roundabout way and had to wait 10 years to get it. Now, I do my best to keep the bike in as good a mechanical shape as I can. I'm not an auto mechanic, but I know my way around an engine and can turn some wrenches when needed. Now, of course, the cosmetics on this are not perfect, but for a bike this old, they're actually not too bad. And I really don't want to change it. Like I said before, it's all original and it's got some character, and I kind of want to just keep it that way, at least for now. Maybe someday I'll change my mind and do a full restoration or something with it, but for right now, I like it the way that it is. Okay, so before I wrap up the video, I'll fire up the engine so you guys can hear it run. Okay, so that's it for my overview and my story about my CM400. If you enjoyed this video, please give it a thumbs up. If you'd like to leave a comment or subscribe, feel free to do that as well. If you'd like to support my channel in another way, please consider visiting my Amazon store, which you'll find linked in the description below. Thanks for watching.